Intimidation from the government is real, it is powerful. And it is because of the changing demographics in the nation. It is the fear of what this larger vote can mean.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
Opponents of the Voting Rights Act seized on Barack Obama's election as a reason why the Voting Rights Act was no longer necessary. At the very moment that you see the ultimate progress, you see conservatives embracing that progress as a reason to try to get rid of the law that made Obama's election possible.
Barack Obama scared the bejeebers out of him. He brought 15 million new voters to the polls. This is what we should be celebrating. Bringing 15 million new people into this incredible civic society, engaged in this democracy, believing that they have a stake in this democracy, and getting out to vote. Instead, that Obama coalition becomes the hit list for voter suppression. How do we stop African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the young and the poor from voting? The Supreme Court decision, Shelby County v. Holder, allowed that to happen.
Shelby County, Alabama, there was an election there in which the districts were redrawn so that the only African-American city council member lost his race. Voter suppression and gerrymandering are two sides of the same coin. Efforts by politicians in power to try to manipulate the process to benefit themselves at the expense of others.
Gerrymandering is a real problem. It's the practice of drawing voting districts in a way that creates unfair advantages for whoever happens to be drawing the lines.
In the age of computers, you can gerrymander with scientific precision. You can run in and out of alleys and up and down streets and carefully include and exclude whichever voters you want in one district and not in another.
Shouldn't all of this be illegal? Well, that's complicated, because if you're gerrymandering to disadvantage minorities, yes, that is illegal under the Voting Rights Act. But if you're gerrymandering to disadvantage voters of an opposing party, that has generally been allowed.
Shelby County willfully violated federal law. They didn't bother to go up to the Department of Justice to check on whether it was okay as they were changing the voting boundaries as the Voting Rights Act required. When they got called on it, when they got sued, they said, we didn't do anything wrong. The era of racism is over.
What had been bipartisan before became extremely partisan after the election of Barack Obama. You know, people tend to forget that Republicans supported it. Every reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act was signed by a Republican president.
I think that democracy, if it's to work, then everybody that's eligible to be a voter should be registered and they should vote.
I am proud to sign the Voting Rights Act, Reauthorization and Amendments Act of 2006.
Ronald Reagan called it the crown jewel of American democracy. But with every subsequent reauthorization, there's a legal challenge brought.
It's a seemingly coordinated strategy that we have seen waged by opponents to rip out the heart of the Voting Rights Act. It was almost a strategy of let's throw spaghetti against the wall and see which one sticks. The Shelby County case is the one that survived the lower courts and winded its way up to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court hears a challenge to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Its detractors say the Voting Rights Act is out of date. Its defenders consider it a needed bulwark for justice.
The Voting Rights Act requires 9 states to get federal approval of changes to their election laws.
From a lawyer's point of view, this is a valid legal case. It could be honorably argued, and that's the business we're in. So we took the case.
We'll hear argument first this morning in case Shelby County versus Holder. Mr. Ryan?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court.
We argued that the Voting Rights Act was probably one of the deepest intrusions of the federal government into areas that states traditionally administered.
I think that really doesn't mask the need for equal treatment of the sovereign states.
I'm going to have a hard time with that. I think can't treat states the same because their problems are different, their populations are different, their needs are different, everything's different.
The non-covered states are worse in that regard than the non-covered states. Is that correct?
Justice Scalia,
every one of them is worse.
Justice Scalia, it's a fair question.
Not just a fair one, it's the crucial question.
The South has changed and made progress, but some things remain stubbornly the same, and the trained effort to deny African-American voters the franchise is part of Alabama's history to this very day.
Have there been episodes, egregious episodes of the kind you're talking about in states that are not covered?
Absolutely, Chief Justice Roberts.
Well, then it doesn't seem to help you make the point that the differential treatment continues to be justified.
John Roberts had it out for the Voting Rights Act as far back as 1982. Early in his political career, it was John Roberts' job to try to prevent the Congress from reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act.
John Roberts, his mentor was William Rehnquist. This is why this lineage is so important, because he hated the Voting Rights Act.
I knew that this was an important act. I knew that it was doing important work, and I knew that it would be a disaster for the court to strike it down.
A controversial ruling today by the Supreme Court.
5-4, the U.S. Supreme Court took the teeth out of a law enacted nearly 50 years ago.
It invalidated a key part of the Voting Rights Act.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, joined by the 3 other liberal justices, said throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet.
I am deeply disappointed with the court's decision in this matter. This decision represents a serious setback for voting rights and has the potential to negatively affect millions of Americans across the country.
I don't know if it's appropriate to say I was pissed off by what the court did.
Thank you.
It really struck home that this was a political decision that the court was making. Justice Ginsburg was correct. If you have an umbrella that keeps you dry in the middle of a thunderstorm, the fact that you're dry doesn't mean that you don't need the umbrella.
Every single one of those states that was covered previously by the Voting Rights Act was told, never mind, we think you're good now, go forth.
The floodgates literally opened in 2013 when the Supreme Court issued its ruling.